It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for your presence in the audience. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. Allow me to begin today's program by making a few brief comments regarding acceptance. All religions except Christianity are merit-based religions. They begin following a religion and have life's ups and downs, but they never know they are accepted by their God until their judgment day. Then, if their good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, then they know they are accepted by their God and they can enter heaven, nirvana, Valhalla, etc. If I were to propose to the girl I wanted to marry that way, she would not marry me. I cannot say to her, after 40 years of marriage, if you have done a good job maintaining our household, then I will accept you. That would be insulting to her. That kind of proposal would insult every one of you as well. Christianity is completely different than all the other religions. Followers of Christ are told they are accepted in the beloved. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 6b. This gives us assurance of our redemption, hope for the future, and certitude that we will pass muster at the day of judgment and make it to our dwelling place that Jesus prepared for us in heaven. In the last episode, we were discussing penal substitutionary atonement, or PSA for short. We know, quotes, the wages of sin is death, end quotes, Romans chapter 6, verse 23, and, quotes, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, end quotes, Romans chapter 3, verse 23. That means we deserve to die, but instead, Jesus died in our place, appeasing the wrath of God, shedding his blood for the redemption of humanity, according to the will of God, bearing the punishment for our sins on himself, satisfying God's offended holiness, so that God can pardon and forgive our sins, paying the ransom price for our liberation. In Genesis 3, God instituted a sacrificial method in the Garden of Eden when God killed an animal and clothed Adam and Eve with the skin of the animal to cover their nakedness that manifested itself after they had sinned. Noah offered sacrifices of thanksgiving after the great flood. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, built altars and made sacrifices wherever they settled. Genesis chapter 12, verse 8, chapter 26, verse 25, chapter 28, verse 18. The nation of Israel was led out from bondage in Egypt into the wilderness, where God instructed Moses to build a tabernacle, a sanctuary for God to dwell in the presence of his chosen people. It took only one night to get Israel out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. In Exodus, Israel is liberated from bondage and established as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In Leviticus, Israel is taught how to fulfill their priestly call. The book of Leviticus can be separated into two major sections. First, the laws of offerings, consecration of the priests, consecration of the people, and atonement of the high priest and his household, atonement of individual persons, and atonement of the nation of Israel. We could call that the way to God in chapters 1 through 17. You know that the word kafar for atonement is found at least 16 times in Leviticus chapter 16. Second, the laws of sanctification for the people and the priest. We could call that the walk with God in chapters 18 through 27. In the book, The Bible in the Light of Our Redemption by E.W. Kenyon, informs us that there are 5 Levitical offerings given to us in the book of Leviticus. The offerings are the burnt offering, chapter 1, the grain or meal offering, chapter 2, the peace offering, chapter 3, the sin offering, chapter 4, verses 1 through chapter 5, verse 13, and the trespass offering, chapter 5, verse 14 through chapter 6, verse 7. Finally, chapter 6, verse 8 through chapter 7, verse 38 discusses the laws of administering the separate offerings. These 5 offerings can be further subdivided. First, the laws of approach to God when in fellowship to God, the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the peace offering. And second, the laws of approach to God when out of fellowship, the sin offering and the trespass offering. Therefore, Leviticus chapter 1 informs us that the burnt offering, if it came from his herd, was to be a male without blemish, and he was to offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle, namely the brazen altar. If, on the other hand, the offering was of birds, it had to be a turtle dove or a young pigeon. But the implication was that an individual Israelite could not fellowship with God without first providing an atonement, a covering for himself. Leviticus chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. There was a threefold judgment passed upon the animal, the offering the individual brought. The man examined it to discover whether or not it was without blemish. The priest examined it, and God examined it. In this last aspect, it represents a foreshadowing of Christ. Christ was examined by the law and found faultless by Pilate. He was examined by the priesthood in Jerusalem, and they could not find any fault in him. Yet they made false charges about him to Pilate. God could find no fault in him. God spoke from heaven on many occasions, quotes, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," end quotes. Jesus found no fault with himself. He said, quotes, "The prince of this world comes and has no part in me," end quotes. John chapter 14, verse 30. Jesus also said, quotes, "Which of you convicts me of sin?" End quotes. John chapter 8, verse 46a. These scriptural passages show the sinlessness of Jesus in his own eyes as well as in the eyes of God the Father and the people. The peace offering was a voluntary offering. The sacrifice expressed praise to God and fellowship with others, Leviticus chapter 3. The burnt offering was burned upon the altar at the door of the tabernacle. Quotes, The priest shall burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord, end quotes. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9b. The burning symbolized the worshiper's desire to be purged of sinful acts. The meal or grain offering described in Leviticus chapter 2 was similar in purpose to the burnt offering. The priest threw a portion on the fire, accompanied by the burning of incense. The sin offering, also known as the guilt offering, was offered to make atonement for sins for which restitution was not possible. Leviticus chapter 4, verses 5 through 12. The trespass offering was made for lesser or unintentional offenses for which restitution was possible. Leviticus chapter 5, verses 14 through 19. 4 of the 5 offerings involved the shedding of blood, a method God instituted to prepare his people for the Messiah's ultimate sacrifice for sins. On 16 different occasions in the book of Leviticus, an aroma is mentioned as something pleasing to the Lord, especially in connection with the various offerings of Israelite worship. The importance of a sacrifice's aroma is not the smell, but what the smell represents, the substitutionary atonement for sin. The very first mention of God smelling the aroma of a burnt offering is found in Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. Noah offered a burnt offering of animals and birds after leaving the ark. We are told it was a pleasing aroma to God. The idea is that Noah's offering was a propitiation or satisfying sacrifice of God's righteous requirement. God was pleased with the sacrifice and then gave the promise to never again destroy creation with a flood. The New Testament reveals Christ as the final sacrifice for sin, the ultimate propitiation. Quotes, Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2. Jesus, the Son of God, was the only one who could provide the eternally pleasing sacrifice. He alone is the one of whom the Father says, quote, You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. End quote. Psalms chapter 2, verse 7. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1, Matthew chapter 3, verse 17, chapter 12, verse 18, and Mark chapter 1, verse 11. The book of Hebrews gives the summary discourse regarding offerings. Quote, Every priest stands ministering daily his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this man, Jesus Christ, after he has offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, and since that time he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool. For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy, end quotes. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 11 through 14. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily, walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.